This next movie I'm really excited about. I don't know how many of you have heard of an author named Chuck Palahniuk. I'm a big fan of Chuck's. His novels, Survivor, Choke, Fight Club, became a movie. And he has another book that's becoming a movie. It's called Lullaby. Mark, what do you think sort of makes Chuck Palahniuk so popular, his novels, and what do you think people love about his work so much?
I think what Chuck does that's so genius is he manages to make he writes satire that doesn't feel like it's satire on the surface.
Yeah.
And he's talking about, especially in works like Fight Club, like he's discussing things like radicalism and terrorism and disaffection and all that in such an entertaining way that you almost forget what he's talking about. And it takes a while before you sort of revisit and you understand, like, oh, that's what that's about. You know, and Lullaby is this book that he wrote in 2002, sort of inspired by the murder of his father and his stepmother, I think, at the hands of a man who he then was instrumental in helping to put behind bars and help decide the death penalty. And it's this sort of haunting story about this father who's reading a lullaby to his kid, this African poem, something about culling, I think. And it turns out that reciting that poem gives him the power to kill people with his mind. And so then he begins this weird serial killer murder spree, which is, of course, less about that, but it's also about that. But it's about sort of parental responsibility. It's about owning up to what you put out in the world. It's about taking responsibility for who you are and how you navigate your way through society. And it's heady and it's strong. And it was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award back when it came out.
Right.
And this apparently is the first time for Lullaby that Chuck is writing his own screenplay.
Yeah. Well, let's bring these guys out, and they'll tell us more about it. Director Andy Mingo and producer Josh Leake. Now, what Mark was saying is true. This is the most involved Chuck's ever been on an adaptation of one of his books. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, we're going to see, we have a video that we're going to be playing in a little bit, but this story in particular is very personal to Chuck. The source of the calling song, what happened during a very difficult time in Chuck's life, and it formed the nexus of this story. And so when it came time to doing a film adaptation, he wanted to make sure that it was done right. He wanted to make sure that, you know, it didn't become some sort of romance or, you know, sitcom or some drama that doesn't really represent the satirical nature of his own brand of horror. So, we talked about it, and actually I co-wrote the screenplay with Chuck, and it was really kind of a nerve-wracking experience in the sense that having to write something, being a fan, first of all, and trying not to mess it up. It was great. I mean, we went back and forth, and I think Chuck really nails it in that he says, basically, writing the screenplay gave him another chance to revisit this story and do it right.
Yeah, and he talked a little bit more about it in this clip, which is pretty cool. So let's run that clip.
Oh man, nasty! You gotta wash your hands afterwards. They're not infectious, but they're kind of nasty.
Kind of like bats.
Yeah.
So how did writing the screenplay for Lullaby differ from writing the novel? For one thing, I wrote the screenplay after having written the script for the Fight Club 2 comic. So I was much more aware about creating finite scenes or finite shots. And I was much more reluctant to use a lot of dialogue. And letterers hate a lot of dialogue. So I had to think much more visually with the comic, and that helped a lot in writing the screenplay. And also, it animated the scenes in the screenplay much more, because in some cases there wasn't kind of a through-line visual reveal, which there typically is in a comic. There's a lot more non-verbal information and plot in a comic. And so learning to write that for the comic helped me in writing the screenplay for Lullaby.
Yeah, I mean, it was
quite an honor, obviously, to be able to adapt it. Fight Club had just been made into a film, and you were writing, of course, during that time, and your father was murdered. How did that incident impact the writing of Lullaby?
My father had been murdered while I was writing Choke, because my father was murdered in the spring, late May of 1999. And Lullaby is the book about dealing with whether or not I advocated the death penalty after the man was convicted of killing my father. And so really Lullaby is really about, is death an escalation, or does it resolve anything? All my stories are stories about power. People who really have no power and they discover a new access to power, or they realize that the power that they have is waning, and they need to reinvent themselves according to a new form of power. Lullaby is about this supernatural form of ancient power that people discover. The present always thinks it's so powerful that we, living in modern times, we feel such superiority to the past. In a way, we really look down on the past because they weren't as smart as we are. They didn't live as long as we will live. Our lives are so much better now. And that's such a huge lie that we have to maintain in order to kind of justify what we think of as progress. And so Lullaby is about what would happen if someone in the present were to discover an aspect of the past that was so fantastically powerful that it could be used for anything.
Cool stuff. Crazy story about his father. I know you guys have some images, some exclusive images, concept art that we haven't seen.
Yeah, we just, first off, are there any of our Kickstarter backers out there? Awesome.
Boom, right there.
We've brought
Front
some
row.
gifts for you, so stay after a little bit. We'll give you some. We just raised about $500,000 on Kickstarter, so we're super excited about that. Yeah, give a round of applause.
Right on.
And we're knee-deep in pre-production. We've hired some illustrators, some comic book artists that have worked on a small
Comic called Batman.
and they're helping us basically pre-visualize the whole film, which is awesome. And we brought along, I think, 4 or 5 different sketches. They haven't been colored. It's literally black and white. But you guys are going to see it here first at Comic-Con, Hall H.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of kind of fantastic elements to Lullaby. I mean, so it has supernatural elements, and so we need to be able to pre-visualize that and be able to discuss these types of concepts with our visual effects people and really kind of figure out how we're going to go about making it happen. And have a lot of you read Lullaby, Chuck Palahniuk's Lullaby? Yeah, a couple of you. Yeah, I mean, so we have a couple of things that are going to be a little bit challenging. So we have a starling murmuration that is taken out by Helen.
What are starlings? Maybe not everyone knows.
Starlings are an invasive species. European starlings were brought over. It's written in Lullaby, and we'll expand it in the film. But they are basically overtaking the United States, North America, after being introduced in New York about a century ago. And so, anyways, they're the symbol of this story, this kind of invasive species that is killed via a calling song in an act of mercy. So we're looking at ways to represent this and make this happen via visual effects. If any of you have read Lullaby, we're not going to be able to actually chant the calling song, or we would kill the audience, and that would suck. So we're looking for visual representations of ways of making the calling song via visual effects.
Yeah, is it like a black mist, or we haven't really decided, but this is kind of an illustration of that.
And this is what we're kind of leaning towards at this point. Is again, this creeping mist and using different types of frame rates, having maybe Carl, the main character, live action, everybody else be stopped, frozen in time.
Ooh, I love this one. This is one of my favorites.
Yes, this is the Judas Cow.
Does everyone know what a Judas Cow is?
Judas Cow is the cow that they use to lead the herd into the slaughterhouse, and then the Judas Cow gets to slide out at the last moment. It's it's a job. This particular Judas Cow becomes what? He becomes possessed, and so therefore people think the Judas Cow is a god, and teaches them songs, teaches the slaughterhouse workers the song. So we need to make sure that we have a Judas Cow that's believable, and at the same time corresponds to Chuck's sense of satire. It's a fine line between horror and satire when it comes to Chuck's work, and Lullaby really, really does represent this.
Right on. Awesome. Very cool.